Walter, thank you as always. You have been very kind to me over the years. And I always enjoyed, I appreciated the opportunity to speak for the Humanities Center because it kind of provokes me to do more studying about what I do. I'm a
Mm,
performer, I'm not a scholar, but I try to be informed. And when I have to make a presentation like this, I have to dig in and find supporting information or evidence for what I'm saying. But I'd like to say kind of upfront that I'm not really speaking as a scholar. I am not a scholar. I'm a performer who is informed by scholars. I like to read what those people who do research in my field have to say. And I will address a little bit of this at the end of my presentation. So that you know what to expect, I will speak for about half an hour. And I really hope that you will ask me questions about what I said, and that would also help me um, address things that are of interest to my listeners. So I chose the subject interpretation of music because it's very broad and general. In the past, I spoke specifically about Baroque music and the issue of whether we have to do historical recreations or could we just use modern instruments but have a sense of the style. That what's more important. Sometimes you can use the right instrument but play poorly or not get the idea of what the music is about. So one thing I want to point out up front, and this comes from a very fine musicologist, British musicologist, who was also a performer. Anyone who plays music would probably know the name Thurston Dart, who wrote actually a book about the interpretation of music. Now, he was a harpsichord player. He was the harpsichord player, the continuo player for the English Chamber Orchestra. He was teaching at one of the big universities. I don't remember. I believe it was Oxford. But he was active as a performer. And it made a big impression on me that up front in the book, he points out that music, like theater, are recreative arts. That's not the case with sculpture or painting. Once the sculptor finishes the sculpture, it's there. You don't have to change it. The most we can do is maybe change the lighting a little bit or where we put it in what place. The same with paintings. But theater and music is written down. Someone has to play the music. Someone has to act the plays. And I had a very nice conversation just a couple of days ago with Jim Thomas, our associate dean, who is a theater person. I said, Jim, would you talk with me? Because that's my idea. Tell me how you approach interpreting a play. And it was very interesting, fascinating to find that actually there's a lot of parallels with music. Just like we have the people who are very attached to historically accurate performances, or they call them authentic. And I say they call them because I disagree with them. I mean, they may be authentic, but there's other ways of being authentic. But they have the same issues in theater. When they do Shakespeare, do you use the same staging? Apparently, in Shakespeare time, they didn't have much scenery. Does the director interpret things in different ways? And there are both schools, several schools, the way we have in music. Now, the basic thing is that notes, when a composer writes a piece, we have a bunch of notes on a piece of paper. There's no music yet. Someone has to play those notes before they become real sounds. I also teach theory here, and I point out to the students that notes are just what you write on the paper. Tones are what we hear. Now, for music to be alive, someone has to play those notes. And It's either a player or it's on the radio or a record player or other devices that can reproduce what was written. So the question that I'm addressing primarily is what are the responsibilities of people, of persons who undertake to bring the notes on the paper to an actual audible experience? This is the performing musicians, basically. So the obvious first requirement is that the performer must be able to read the music, and I don't just mean read the notes like you read letters, but to read and understand how they are connected, understand the instructions of the composer. When they put dots, what do they mean? When they put accents, what do they mean? When they say crescendo or decrescendo, what's the difference between decrescendo and diminuendo? No, that kind of thing. We have to be able to read what the composer wrote down. And then we must have this elusive ability to comprehend the meaning of the notes and the intent of the composer. That's a very difficult thing. I was tempted, I'm sorry I did not do it. I was going to write on finale a piece of music. I just played a sonata by Geminiani and one by Handel. Put it on finale and then have finale played back to me. And then I would play it for you to see the huge difference that if you just reproduce the notes the way they are written, is not going to have much impact on the listener. So what is it that we performers do when we make those notes not only living sounds, but meaningful sounds, something that the listener can enjoy? Through us, the listener would enjoy the music of Beethoven, of Schubert, of Brahms. So it is a very difficult task, and it is one that is difficult to define as to what do we really do. And many great musicians try to define the responsibilities of the performer and to define what constitutes a faithful representation of the work. Part of the problem and also part of the essential beauty of music is that it allows multiple possibilities. For example, one of the movements in the art of interpretation has been the movement for historically correct performances. They said we have to play the way Bach heard it, the way Vivaldi heard his music. But even within this movement, there are differences. Some prefer to follow what they believe is a historical recreation, to perform it the way it was done in the during the composer's life, or there's another term that I like to use, historically informed performance, one that takes into account everything that we know about the work, how it was played, but we have to make it ultimately accessible, enjoyable by the listener. So if you just do a very precise, academically correct performance, doesn't mean it's going to communicate. So I don't think that's what good old Bach and Handel and Vivaldi wanted. I think they wanted people to be inspired and moved by their music. So the other thing is we have so many composers, schools of compositions, aesthetic philosophies about music. There's differences, social, geographical characteristics. I wonder if such an approach is realistic or even desirable. So if someone is in France and they are very familiar with the French style, doesn't mean they cannot play German music by German composers. It doesn't mean that they cannot play music by American composers. And when they do that, they may not quite play it the way people in another place would. You know, I remember as a student at Aspen, Sergio Commissione, a wonderful conductor, said to us one thing, you know, Just um, be yourselves. If you're funny, be funny. If you're serious, be serious. And two, more important, some people will like you, some will not. He says, I go to one place in London and they think I'm a wonderful conductor for Mozart. I conduct the same way in Paris and they think I'm a terrible Mozart interpreter. Just be prepared. Not everybody will like what you do. And that was very wise advice, I think, at the time. Now, what I feel, and now I'm talking as a performer, my experiences of having played under conductor, having played in chamber music recitals, is that uh, all the great works of music have a distinct content, distinct characteristics that will come to life when performed by talented, well-schooled, skilled, thoughtful, perceptive, sensitive musicians. It's not something one can prove with evidence. It's something that you feel when you go to a concert and you hear, for example, Neme Yarvi, who was here for many years. You went to his concerts and you enjoyed his music making. He doesn't have to prove that he was doing all the right things. In fact, he often did it. He was not exactly what you might call a scholarly guy, but he has this ability to make music in a way that the audience would enjoy. I think the composers would be happy to have that conductor do their music. At least most of the time, he was very successful. Now, what I did is trying to examine the essential elements of preparation for a good performance. And a book that made an impression on me a long time ago, and I picked it up again, was by Eric Leinsdorf, very prominent conductor. He was conductor of the Boston Symphony. I think he did a stint with the New York Philharmonic. He was regular at the Metropolitan Opera. And interestingly enough, he called his book The Composer's Advocate. And then he says something about, let me see if I can grab it here. I don't know where I put it. There is a second sentence, the composer's advocate, a radical orthodoxy for musicians. He can be quite acerbic and very critical, but he has a very sharp mind. So he goes on to tell us, he mentions the importance of knowing the content and having a sense of the music that is being prepared for performance, but points out that in addition to knowledge about a piece of music, a performer needs imagination, thoughtful intelligence, and ultimately the willingness to forget ourselves in the service of what we undertake to represent, the composer and his music. Now, there was a time, and there are still people today, who will use the music to showcase their skills. That's not something that Mr. Leinsdorf would approve. We are supposed to be the servants of the composer. We are supposed to provide a service, kind of to preach the music of the composer. And I like this title, The Composer's Advocate. So he goes on to tell us that to accomplish this goal, we must agree on several premises. One, great composers knew what they wanted. Two, the interpreter must have the means at his disposal to grasp the composition's intentions, the composer's intentions, or of each particular work. And three, music must be read with knowledge and imagination without necessarily believing every note and word that is printed. Now, that's a very controversial statement, because on the one hand, he tells us we must do what the composer said, but then when you read something, don't take it for granted that it's correct. What he's referring to is things that went wrong in the process of publishing a piece. There are sometimes mistakes that didn't get corrected. So if you see something, do some more research. We recently, meaning in the last 10, 12 years, got one more edition of the authentic edition of the Beethoven symphonies, because Jonathan Del Mar, a British musicologist and conductor, discovered that we were using editions still, even the ones that we thought were authentic, that had mistakes. So that's what he's referring to. It doesn't mean go around and change everything you see there or anything as you feel like. So, of course, these premises already provoke questions I wrote down here. Mr. Leinstorff deals with this question in his book. Obviously, I'm not going to go through the entire book. There's about 300 pages there. But I want to move on some of the fundamental items that a performer must know. This is according to Maestro Leinstorff. One, the score, the actual music that was created by the composer. By the score, I don't just mean the conductors. It could be a violin, piano sonata by Beethoven. I need to know what Beethoven wrote. The score provides melodic material, the duration of each note, the harmony, the rhythms, directions regarding the volume, loud, soft, and so on, and also about expression. Two, we should know something about the composer, his life, his background. Perhaps we have documents like letters, essays that they wrote, and so on. If one is learning, let's say, sonata by Beethoven for violin and piano, you shouldn't just learn that one sonata. You should look at the other sonatas, because then you will see that sonata in the context of other pieces that that composer wrote. In fact, I would go beyond looking at the other sonatas. I would like to look at his piano sonatas, at his string quartets, the septet, other chamber music that Beethoven wrote, because those will inform me, will give me a better idea of what I'm doing with my one sonata for the week or for the month. Third one, knowing what the composer wanted. This is difficult because sometimes composers said contradictory things about their pieces. Ultimately, when I look at the score, and I think most performers, we try to find not just the notes and how to play the notes, but we try to discover the spirit of the work. And I have to say that great composers are very good at it. If you really sit there thoughtfully and objectively, you can discover what was in their mind. Still, the importance of performing music as it is written without making changes must be our overarching goal. Exceptions exist. For example, if a composer did not give specific instructions, you have to come up with your own. I'm hoping that at the end of the lecture, I will play just a very 1 minute something by Handel that he doesn't tell me anything other than forte. And what I did, the process I went through to decide on how I was going to do it this week. Next month, maybe I will do it differently. Especially, this is common in the Baroque era. Bach, Handel, they may just say vivace, which means lively. But how fast, how slow, there is no exact. Even their allegros, they use cut time. Cut time, for those who don't know, is when we count 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4. We actually fill them in 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Da-da-dum, 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 no, da-da-dum, 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 da-da-dum. So we emphasize every other beat. It makes a kind of a larger scheme than a smaller. Now, performer must decide the actual speed depending on the notation and the overall character of the music. Because you cannot say every vivace written in 3/8 or 3/4 must be played at, let's say, metronome marking 68. Doesn't work that way. Beethoven in his Eroica in the third movement, He has a scherzo, and you have a lot of quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So there you can. I like to group measures into phrases. I can get the same metric system, Mendelssohn Scherzo, but he has a lot of more notes. And I remember what the conductor told us in my first year at the college was when you approach a piece, look at the fastest, the quickest notes, the smallest note value. So don't take a tempo that will make it impossible for you to play the fastest. But don't play something so slowly that the listener will lose the sense of continuity. So those are practical bits of advice on how to do that. By the way, Beethoven, as you know probably, added metronome markings when the metronome was discovered. And some people take pride in performing Beethoven's music at the exact metronome marking that Beethoven wanted. And I'm not sure that Beethoven would be happy every time they do that. For example, recently I had a string quartet playing his Opus 59, number 3. The last movement is a fugue, quite fast. And yes, they played it at the metronome marking that Beethoven indicated. But they were not clear. It was very scratchy because it was so fast they couldn't make a beautiful sound. Why do that? Now I remember Rudolf Kolisch. Rudolf Kolisch was a very prominent quartet player in the early part of the 20th century, and I coached with him at New England Conservatory. Bela Bartok dedicated one of his quartets to the Kolisch quartet to him. He was the first to play Schoenberg's Pierrot Lunaire. He was a very both intellectual but knowledgeable musician. Even Kolisch would say to me, you know, if you are 10% off from what the composer said, if that would make the music sound better, do it. He never said you have to do it exactly at that metronome. It just tells me, the metronome marking tells me that the composer really wants this very fast or very slow. I will come back to this issue of the metronome because there have been instances where performers made very serious mistakes in interpreting the metronome marking. So the next thing that Leinstorff mentions is knowing musical traditions. If something was done like in the Baroque era, they would add ornaments, they would add turns, they would be expected to improvise on the second time. You know, if they wrote there would be a movement that had long notes and then there was a repeat. They were expected to improvise around that line. But there was an instance in Beethoven Ninth, da-dee, da-dee, da, when the music in the baritone has the same note, da, da, but traditionally they would do an upper note, ti, and the singer didn't want to do it. Beethoven wrote that in the cello part because we string players in general want to play what is written on paper. But apparently singers got this tradition of adding the appoggiatura. So with Brahms, I learned also from Mr. Commissiona, when Brahms says marcado, it doesn't mean pound the notes, it means highlight the line, make it more expressive. And this happens in his second symphony, where if someone really da, 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 if you do real marcado, the way we understand it generally, would actually do damage to the music. And I remember Mr. Commissiona said, you know, this is the Hauptstimme, it's the main voice. What Brahms is telling us when he says marcado is mark it out, bring it out. Schoenberg then used the main voice, the term for that. Now, knowing the right tempo is another element that Leinstorff brings up, and I think I spoke about that already, how we find it. The metronome marking, what if there is no metronome marking? The two examples it was so common in Beethoven's Seventh Symphony in the trio, tatia, tatia, ta 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 ta, just to remind people. And then we have da ra ram, da ra ra. I attended performances by one of the composers that I admire the most, Otto Klemperer, but he would just go da ra ram, da ra ram, da ri da ra. What Beethoven wrote would have been more like da ra ram, da ra ram, da ri da ra da di. He says 88. That's quite fast. Now, a little bit slower, that's fine. But if you go twice as slow, that's not so fine. One of the worst examples of a mistake was when Shostakovich wrote his Fifth Symphony. That was the one that Stalin got mad at him because of an opera he wrote. And I won't go too much in detail, but basically they told him that a Soviet artist must write music that's optimistic and positive because that's what we communists do. We have a happy society here. Well, he didn't like this dark opera. So Shostakovich wrote his Fifth Symphony, and he said something to the effect, I don't remember the exact words, that Soviet artist positive response to fair criticism. And the last movement ends up with what appears to be a triumphant march. Etc. Okay. So the score comes over. Everybody is competing here. It should, I think it was Stokowski in Philadelphia and the New York Philharmonic who was going to be the first to play the new symphony by Shostakovich. And they see this marking that says um, eighth note equals 186, which if my math is good, that means quarter note would be about 93. Now, if you do that, you end up with a march that goes dum da dee dee da da dee da da da, which feels slow. On top of that, the violins, a number of instruments are pounding and they da 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 da, just repeating this. I don't know how many hundreds times. So they were puzzled, the conductors here. They said, no, this must be a mistake. He cannot mean eighth note quarter equals 83. He must mean that's the half note, so it would be twice as fast. And I'm sure those who heard Shostakovich 5 know that then how exciting it is. But here we're in a minor key. And it ends up, we had people who knew Shostakovich, and especially Mstislav Rostropovich explained this very well to us. And I heard on the radio a broadcast from New Jersey Symphony with Hugh Wolf, who was his assistant, tell this story. No, what Shostakovich intended was not a triumphal march, but those repeated dates is like someone driving nails in your head, and you are being told you are condemned to celebrate. Think about it. You are condemned to celebrate. So he was actually, on the surface, he was being apologetic and writing optimistic music for the Soviet regime, but the underneath meaning was, you are forcing me to pretend that I'm celebrating. That was a big mistake. Nowadays, a lot of conductors strike the happy medium. They go about 126, 130. But when you hear Mravinsky conducted or Rostropovich, then you really get the true meaning of that work. That's how wrong we can go sometimes with metronome markings and with tempo indications. I liked what another person I studied with, Daniel Pinkham, who was a modern composer but a Baroque expert at New England Conservatory. And he was, of course, espousing that we should play Baroque music on Baroque instruments and Novi Prada and all that stuff. But he used to say in the end, children, it has to make sense. And I won't forget that. You can use your intellect and your scholarship and everything to make music, but if it doesn't make sense, it's not going to work. That's not really the purpose of music. I will add one of my own things in what makes a good performance, and that's knowing how to shape and define each phrase, how to build larger sections by connecting phrases naturally, and above all, for every movement and every piece to create a sense of wholeness in its work, especially when you do a symphony and you have four movements. And I'm very thankful that I heard Sir Adrian Ball talk about this. He would come and conduct us at the college, and I had a few sessions with him, lessons. He always said about how a big responsibility of the performer is to let a piece unfold in such natural way that it's like you put the score on the screen, 2 pages. That a listener forgets about time and just hears the music from beginning to end and has the sense of wholeness, of everything happens without the sense of time. And I remember attending a performance of his conducting Schubert Ninth Symphony, which is very long. We joke sometimes. Schubert wrote one unfinished symphony and one endless. The endless is the so-called nine because it's very long. But as a matter of fact, I never forget that performance. It felt like the whole symphony lasted 5 minutes. It's not that he played fast, but it just flowed so naturally that I had no awareness of time. That to me is an ideal performance. You forget about yourself. You just get carried by the music. So the big question remains, are we aiming to present a performance of each work as it sounded and experienced when it was first heard? Or should we aim for a performance that captures the spirit and the essence of each work so that the audience will appreciate the music? I feel that these two possibilities can actually be blended. You can be respectful of the historical evidence. You can learn from it, but you can also focus on what the music is about and what is its purpose. What did the composer intend to communicate? We must try to understand how the composer made the many choices he or she did in every measure of the work. I like a book by Vincent Persichetti, American composer, about composition. He says, if you play a note, and I do this trick in my theory class, and they all laugh. Okay, I go like this. You don't know what I'm going to do next. I could go, right? I can go. You already think I'm going to be nice and have a nice good. But I could go. And then I can write a very contemporary piece. What Persichetti was saying, basically, you write a note, you can go anywhere. You go to the next note, you've established something. Then you have zillion choices. The moment you put the third note, the fourth note, the fifth, now your piece is beginning to get a personality, an identity, a particular meaning. And composers, and I read this from Gunther Schuller's book, every minute they have millions of choices. They make those choices. Our job is to understand what the composer is doing. Why did he go to a G and not a G sharp? Why did he not go to a B flat instead of a B natural, and so on? Now, this analysis of the elements of the score is what leads us to discover the feeling and meaning of each phrase. We then explore ways of bringing every note and every phrase to life. We also develop, at least I try to, develop a cohesive understanding of the piece. Our practice and preparation for the performance of the work will be guided by our understanding of the piece. I do want to stress that, as Gunther Schuller states in his book, he wrote this book, The Complete Conductor, The Complete Musician. A mechanically, technically accurate performance may be clinically interesting, but unless its accuracy also translates into an emotional, expressive experience for the listener, the musicians, including conductors, have to feel this. It will be an incomplete realization, one that will not, indeed cannot, adequately represent the work. It's just that very simple thing we tell students sometimes: play with feeling. But you must not impose your feeling. You must derive that feeling from the music. Now, before I move on, is the question, how do we develop our ability to interpret music? And I already spoke about Baroque music. I don't know how much time I have, but I'd like to play you a couple of videos. I definitely believe that it is possible to play Baroque or any music well and communicate the spirit without necessarily using Baroque instruments. And I'd like to mention some musicians that I admire, like Mari Perahia on piano. I'm happy to hear him play Bach or anything, anytime, Scarlatti. It's not an original instrument, but his understanding of music is tremendous. Another one that I admire is Hélène Grimaud. In fact, I tell students the best chaconne by Bach performance is the one that Hélène Grimaud does. It's of course the arrangement, a transcription by Busoni. But she has such a sense of the rhythm and the structure that if I'm learning the chaconne, I'm not going to listen to violinists. I'm going to listen to Hélène Grimaud playing on the piano. Now, let me try and play for you Vivaldi's Spring. One group using original instruments, Baroque instruments, the other using modern instruments. Oh, I should share the screen now. What's going on here? Oh, don't stop, please. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry to stop it now, but I want to give you the contrasting. I share the screen again. I'm sorry, can you hear the sound?
We can hear it, but it's a bit intermittent.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes. Yes. Um, I was concerned about, can you hear me now? Yes, I was concerned about the sound quality that you're getting. What I would like to do is send you the links, send to everyone who has attended, if I can give the links, because these are both excellent performances. One, the first one on Baroque instruments, the second one on modern instruments. They both capture the spirit of the music very well. That's my feeling about it. I see that we are almost running out of time. So there's one last thing that I have. I'm going to skip some of the things that I said, and I'm going to talk about something else. And that is, how does one acquire or develop the ability to present authentic performances? And my answer is quite simple, but unfortunately not followed often. Every musician needs teachers, mentors, who will show and guide the way of studying and preparing performances. It sounds very simple, but it's not followed. Why? And this is it. Various courses, when we take theory, when we take history, there's a lot of valuable information there. Likewise, when I study books, when I study articles. However, the actual process of learning how to prepare and present meaningful, moving performances depends on teachers who are or have been successful performers. Teachers who have first-hand knowledge of what it takes to develop the necessary knowledge, technique, psychology, attitude, and other personal traits. So these qualities in musical understanding of the repertory, awareness of personal characteristics, you learn about yourself, style of each composer, strategies, methods for building technique, awareness of the emotional, spiritual content of each work to be performed, control of oneself and dedication, persistence in pursuing artistic excellence. I feel it's important that every musician should have more than one teacher. I was really blessed that I had at least four major violin teachers. Each of them was different. My first teacher at the, and I'm not talking about high school and before. At the college, my first teacher was concertmaster of the City of Birmingham Symphony. That's the orchestra that Simon Rattle built his career on. Then I went to Antonio Broza, who was a prominent soloist. He gave the first performance of the Benjamin Britten Violin Concerto, both in England for the BBC and with New York Philharmonic. He led in a quartet. He never played in orchestra. He was just a soloist. His method was, I had to copy him. He demonstrated, and made me do things over and over again. When I was in Boston, I studied with the associate concertmaster of the Boston Symphony. Wonderful man, wonderful violinist. He was very supportive, explained things very well, and encouraging. But the last one, I went to Mr. Ritchie, and I'm glad I went when I did. He did not ask me to copy him. He always questioned me and guided me, and I can look back at what he was doing, was really pushing me to think for myself. And once I came up with ideas, he was happy, and when I didn't come up with ideas, he was clearly unhappy. So at that point, it was not just learning violin, but how to use the violin to make music. I had a wonderful theory composition teacher at the Royal College who used to give me advice, said, you can learn more by studying music and listening to music than reading books about music. I will never forget Mr. Stevens. It isn't that I'm against studying books. I do it myself. I read books, etc. But one has to spend time with the instrument and listening to music and listen to great performers and appreciate different interpretations. It's very rare that I will say someone is bad. It may not be to my taste, but I try to enjoy what every artist has to offer. Do we have a couple of minutes? Okay. I'm going to try.
Yes,
but
indeed.
I don't know if it will be successful because I just had to play this on Sunday. And I want you to know that Mr. Handel is not exactly telling me much. I get it, and I'm going to play exactly what Handel wrote. No dynamic indication. It doesn't tell me if it's loud or soft or mezzo, nothing. So here what he writes. Well, of course, this is boring. How can I play this like this? So I start and play. How do I know if I don't do something, it's going to come out? But I go, because I see a line. Or someone is being playful. And he said, oh, and I don't want to bore you with my practicing, but I assure you, I could spend half an hour or an hour just deciding that first line, how to shape it and how to play it. Vibrato, more vibrato, less vibrato. Speed of the bow, which note should come out as the height of the mini phrase, and how do I relate it to everything on those whole 2 pages. It takes about 5 minutes to play this one movement. So I'd like to have some questions, maybe.
Yes, I'm sure there are questions. But as Jackie was going to tell you, what we would like you to do is to raise your hands electronically. There is sort of something, a reaction button, and you can raise your hand, and then we would recognize you so you can speak.
I don't hear. Am I doing something?
No, due to the settings for this Zoom and the Zoom bombers earlier, you have to raise your hand so that I can unmute you. Or you can put your question in the chat. I saw a comment.
I am really sorry. I guess I had my sound off. I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, no problem. There are a few comments in the chat if you wanted to go over those. Do you know how to access the chat?
Yes, here I am here. My apology, everyone. Let us unmute. I can't seem to be able to unmute. I have doubts. I can't hear anything. Can anyone else hear anything? Don't answer that. My apologies, everyone. There are multiple Zoom bombers.
Oh, it's towards the bottom.
I'm unable.
By Matthew.
Yeah, but Matthew said that the ultimate authority of their music gets still fallible human people who do not have all the answers and must rely on the musicality performance to realize. Yes, thank you, Matthew. That's a very good comment. And I would like to say something. When it's really wonderful experience when I did works by living composers, and especially when there were the first performances, because I had the opportunity to go back to them and say, you know, here I'm not sure what you want, and they would clarify, or can I suggest something here? And sometimes they would. So I always enjoy working with composers. At the University of Pittsburgh, part of my job was to conduct works that were composed by people pursuing their doctorate or their master's degree in composition. And the university would actually had funding to hire professional players. I would get a few from the Pittsburgh Symphony or the Pittsburgh Opera Orchestra The downside was that they would only give me 2 rehearsals, and that was a lot of music to learn, and difficult music. I'm happy to see some of these people like Reza Vali now. Apparently, the Pittsburgh Symphony will be performing a new work of his celebrating his 70th birthday. And he was a young man there. He's an Iranian-American composer. Daniel Godfrey was another one. I did a piece by him. He called it Wild Horses. Then it became Mestengo. So anyway, anybody else?
See, Professor Dushan had his hand up.
Yes, please.
I do. Thank you for a great talk, Professor Markou. Seeing as we're all on Zoom right now, and here we are in, going into, what is it, the year 3 of this fun ride we're on, I'm wondering if you might want to share your thoughts on the challenges, and maybe there are benefits, I don't know, of interpreting music electronically, either through Zoom or you were using YouTube. Are there benefits? How can we get around the challenges? What do you think?
I really wouldn't know how to answer. I'm not. I mean, the question. I think of many questions now. The quality of sound concerns me, that we get electronically. At home, I have a pretty good system of speakers, and my son helped me connect through whatever they call it, Bluetooth. So whenever I play something online from YouTube, there's so many wonderful performances on YouTube. And I learn about. I don't do it through the speakers on my computer or even the little speakers I have near it. I connect them to my hi-fi system. The only problem, I have to move there. So yes, one can hear a lot of music from across the world without having to go there. I can listen to Vienna Philharmonic, Berlin Philharmonic, London Symphony, right here in my home. And the other night I was listening to our Detroit Symphony, the concert. The concern is when you do it in space, there's something happens that's beyond any electronics. I mean, maybe the vibrations that we don't even hear physically, but they change the color of the sound. So we can use all of them, live concerts and electronically reproduced concerts.
Thank you.
Were there
Anyone?
any?
Yes.
Were there any additional questions? You can just raise your hand or put them in the chat. Let's see. Check the chat. Okay. Oh, Mary, did you have a question?
Yeah, the one statement that you made, Kypros, thank you for this talk. When you talked about your series of teachers, yes. And it was only the last one was Ritchie, was it Stanley Ritchie?
No, Ruggiero, modern violinist. Yes, Stanley is the Baroque guy. Ruggiero Ritchie, he passed away 10 years ago.
Right, yeah, but my question is, do you see that teachers perhaps are somewhat changing their mode of teaching to a new generation of students? The standard repertoire that they learn themselves, are they letting out or allowing a little bit more input from what this new generation of musicians might bring to the interpretation? Yeah, rather than simply teaching a tradition from teacher to student that doesn't really change.
But they don't do that. The good people don't do that. They don't just teach you the tradition. That's how we used to do it. What they do is, having gone through experience, for example, Mr. Broza had a name for himself in England. I didn't really know that because I knew him more as a romantic player, of performing the living composers of his time. And the other, Ruggero Ricci, he played many contemporary works as well. What they are teaching is an attitude. It's an attitude to be open to, I mean, I don't know where I got this idea that I was always interested in new music. I was very excited at University of Pittsburgh when they gave me the chance to do the new music. And I learned from these composers. The problem with teaching is when they tell them this is the way to do it, and this is what we learn, and that's what you play. But that's not what I got. I got the foundation from Mr. Felix Koch, my first teacher. This is how we play Mozart. But Mr. Stevens also was a big influence. It's the attitude to being open to anything, whether it's discovering new things in Beethoven or discovering a new composer. The creative spirit of Bach, it's just as modern as anybody. You show me someone who has that creative spirit today, and I would say he has another Bach. I don't think it's different. I mean, you're talking to someone who, we grew up with that burden of the classical Greek culture. I mean, when I read Socrates, I don't think I'm reading an old guy. It's very modern thinking. So Mr. Ricci did many premieres. His attitude was actually be creative. That's why I stress the fact that maybe at that stage of my career, of my studies, he felt that I was ready to be challenged, to think for myself. And I didn't even realize it to the extent that it was until later. I said, my God, he really didn't tell me, copy me. He just showed me the way on how to think. I still like to listen. When I hear these young people playing like this, I learn from them. And whether it's contemporary music or old music, it's all music. Am I making sense, or am I too idealistic?
No, well, it's idealistic, but your point is the very best teachers are they're in collaboration with you and teaching you how to.
Yeah. I'm very thankful to that guy. I think of him often. And soon, it's about 10 years from his passing away. Yeah. Anyone else? Composers, theorists?
Well, I guess to wrap it up, I just wanted to say thank you so much for giving this presentation, and thank you to everyone who attended. We really appreciated your insightful thoughts. And as a thank you, we wanted to give you a journal and a caddy with the Humanity Center logo on it. And I'll reach out to you shortly to see how we can get that to you once we're back on campus.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you.
Thank you again, my friend. And I hope everything goes all right with you. You look young and fresh and invigorated and so on. So thank you again, and take care.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, Dr. Wolf. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.